Thank you. It is such a pleasure and honor for me to be here with you today in your fine city of Houston. I share with you stories of courage, of bravery, struggle, spirit, and ultimately inspiration. And along the way, I share as well some of the many lessons I have learned in almost 30 years of the privilege of singing for Israel's wounded. I met Adam many years ago in Tel HaShomer Hospital. He had been serving in the reserves in Miluim, fell, and ended up in the hospital. He was married, had 2 young children, and I appeared in his hospital room two or three days after the initial accident. I had been informed before Adam was to be informed that he would never walk again. The fact that he could not feel his legs was not a temporary event, but in fact would define his life as he continued forward in a wheelchair. At the time, he was a man in his mid-30s. Adam was very positive, very optimistic, very upbeat. But there were moments where it was so hard for him to internalize what had happened. I would go to be with him every week, to sing for him, to hold him, to hug him. On one of my visits, Adam started to cry. And he said to me, "Let me tell you something about me." He said, "My life was defined by dance. I'm a dancer. I would go dancing at least 4 or 5 nights a week with different groups in Israel that danced Israeli folk dancing." He said, "When I fell, I realized I couldn't feel my legs. And the first thought that came into my mind was not, oh my God, I might never walk again, but rather, oh my God, I might never dance again." And then he said, "Rita, I don't know that life is worth living." And with tears in his eyes, he said, "Why? Why should I bother? I no longer have my dance. What is there for me?" I'm very pragmatic, and when I visit soldiers, I give love, I give warmth, I try to give hope, I try to inspire, but there are certain facts of reality that are irrefutable. And I said to Adam, "My darling Adam, you will not dance again. You will be wheelchair bound. But you are a man of passion, a man of enormous courage, a man with an extraordinary support system in your wife and children. Adam is the son of Holocaust survivors. His both parents survived Auschwitz and the Death March." On one of my visits to Adam's hospital room, his father was there with him. And this is what his father said to me. He said, "Isn't it right that you're American?" I said, "Yes." He said, "And am I correct that you in the United States had a president who was in a wheelchair?" I was impressed that he knew that. I said, "Yes, Franklin Roosevelt was in a wheelchair." He said, "If you had a president of the United States who could serve his country in a wheelchair, my son Adam can do anything." That was the background Adam came from. And when Adam cried in my arms, I said to him, "You will get through this. No, you won't dance again, but I know that you will find some kind of other something that will fill your life the way dancing filled it, and you will bring to it the passion to which you brought your dancing. And I will be with you, and we will go through it together." Adam is today one of my dearest friends, and Adam taught me one of the great lessons I was to learn. I visited him 2 and 3 times a week for the 6 months that at that point I was living in Israel. I then moved back to the States, and I would call every week. At that point, believe it or not, we didn't have cell phones. And I would call on a public telephone in the hallway in the rehabilitation department of Tel HaShomer Hospital, where Adam at first was wheeled to the telephone, and as he got stronger, he clearly wheeled himself to the telephone. And every week I called to say, Adam, my darling, I'm with you, I hug you, I love you. And on one of those phone calls, he said to me, Ritale, when are you coming back to Israel? I said, I'm hoping to be here within the year. He said, when you come back, I have a surprise for you. I said, great, I love surprises. Tell me, tell me, tell me. He said, no, it's a surprise. As the time got closer, and I realized that I was coming to Israel, I called Adam and I said, I have a date, I have an hour, what's the surprise? And he said, I'll give you a little piece of the surprise. You are to meet me on the first Tuesday night that you are in Israel at the rehabilitation center known as Beit HaLochem, major rehabilitation center in Israel for wounded soldiers. Meet me there at 7:30. I said, great. What's happening there? He said, that's the surprise. At the designated hour, I showed up at Beit HaLochem to see my darling Adam, who was no longer in a hospital setting, was no longer in hospital pajamas, in a wheelchair for sure, but dressed with a huge smile on his face. We hugged, we kissed, I cried. With that, he took me to the elevator, and we went down a couple of floors that opened to a huge gymnasium. And all the while I was saying to myself, what am I doing here exactly? What's the surprise? What's happening? I looked around the gym thinking that some of the men that I was seeing in wheelchairs were probably men who were wounded alongside Adam, who I sang for sometimes at 1 o'clock in the morning in the hospital when I would come back to pick their spirits up. When all the chevra, all their friends were there, those were the hours I loved to come to sing with them. I looked around the room. I didn't recognize a soul. Alongside the many men in wheelchairs, I noticed that there were a group of very pretty Israeli women, able-bodied, on 2 legs. They were also walking around, just kind of hanging. I had no idea what was waiting for me. Suddenly a woman walked into the room who, by her posture and by her carriage, I understood that she was a dancer. She came to the front of the gym, started playing around with a boombox tape recorder, putting in tapes, pushing buttons. All of a sudden, music started to play. And all of a sudden, all of the men in wheelchairs and the beautiful women alongside them began to dance. A group had formed in Beit HaLochem called Wheelchair Dancers. It was a very new concept in Israel at the time, and it was for soldiers who had been seriously wounded, who were now confined to wheelchairs, to give them the possibility of dancing. The surprise was that Adam had invited me to one of his rehearsals and to show me what had happened to him since the time he left the hospital. And for an hour and a half, I sat in this rehearsal and I cried. When the rehearsal was over, I went over to hug Adam, and I said, you were right, and I was wrong. I told you that you would never dance again. You proved me wrong. Adam said to me, it's true that I can't walk, but I can dance. I will tell you that Adam, whose picture you see going through here, is today a serious wheelchair dancer. He represents Israel in all of the international competitions worldwide in wheelchair dancing. And today, 17 years after his injury, Adam is number 2 in the world in ballroom wheelchair dancing. It is such a privilege for me to say that this man is my friend, to understand that as he dances in front of prime ministers and heads of state, he reminds me and us all that the triumph of the human spirit knows no bounds. It is the triumph of Israel, it is the triumph of the Jewish people, and it is the triumph of Adam Greenfeld.